Ethiopian church took all of this literature, which included literature that nobody considered scripture at the time, and they appear to have just been non-discretionary and included everything.
For nearly 2,000 years, Christians have believed that the story of Jesus was preserved within the pages of the Bible. The books were chosen, the canon was established, and generations of believers accepted that the essential teachings of Christ had been passed down intact. But what if another tradition survived beyond the reach of Rome, hidden in the mountains of Ethiopia? What if ancient manuscripts preserved teachings that never became part of mainstream Christianity? According to a remarkable story from a remote Ethiopian monastery, a dying monk spent his final hours revealing secrets he had guarded for decades. And what he allegedly revealed challenges everything many people think they know about faith, authority, and the message of Jesus himself. The Monk on the Cliff. High in the mountains of northern Ethiopia stands Debre Damo, one of the most isolated monasteries in the world, perched atop a sheer cliff and accessible only by climbing a long leather rope. The monastery has remained largely untouched by the outside world for centuries. Within its stone walls, generations of monks have dedicated their lives to prayer, study, and the preservation of ancient manuscripts. According to the story, one of those monks was Brother Abate, an elderly scholar who spent more than 60 years guarding a manuscript unlike any most Western Christians have ever encountered. His eyesight had faded with age. His hands, stained by decades of copying texts with ink and reed pens, trembled as he turned the fragile pages. Yet despite his failing health, he possessed an intimate knowledge of the manuscript. He had read it every day since he was a young man. The text before him was written in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. Its pages were made of vellum, and its contents were considered so important that generations of monks had allegedly protected it from outsiders. Few people had ever seen it, and even fewer had studied it in detail. On the final night of his life, Brother Abate called 2 disciples to his side. The old monk knew his time was running out. For decades, he had remained silent about certain passages contained within the manuscript. But now, with death approaching, he believed the moment had finally come to speak. The manuscript was known as the Mashafa Kedan, or the Book of the Covenant. According to tradition, it preserved teachings attributed to the risen Christ during the mysterious 40-day period between the resurrection and the ascension. While the New Testament says relatively little about what occurred during those 40 days, this text claimed to fill in the gaps. As the candlelight flickered inside the small monastery chamber, Brother Abate began revealing what he believed were 3 teachings that institutional Christianity had ignored, forgotten, or deliberately set aside. Whether one accepts these claims as history, legend, or spiritual tradition, the story itself raises fascinating questions. Why would generations of monks guard a text so carefully? What made its content so controversial? And why would an elderly monk wait until the final hours of his life to share what he believed was its most important message? For Brother Abate, the answer was simple. He believed the world had finally entered the exact conditions described within the manuscript, and before he died, he wanted someone to hear the warning. The first hidden teaching. As Brother Abate continued reading from the ancient manuscript, he arrived at what he believed was the first of 3 teachings that had been largely forgotten by the modern world. According to the Mashafa Kedan, the risen Christ did not return merely to comfort his followers after the resurrection. Instead, he returned to prepare them for challenges that would emerge long after they were gone. To modern ears, the statement may sound like a poetic reflection on spirituality, but according to the tradition preserved within the monastery, it was intended as something much more direct. Brother Abate believed the passage was a warning. The message suggested that faith should not become dependent on buildings, institutions, or physical structures. Instead, spiritual transformation was meant to take place within the individual. For centuries, religions around the world have invested enormous resources into constructing impressive places of worship. Cathedrals, temples, shrines, and churches became symbols of devotion and power. Some inspired millions through their beauty. Others became centers of political influence and wealth. Yet this teaching seemed to point in a different direction. The manuscript claimed that Christ warned his disciples about a future in which religious authority could become entangled with earthly power. It described leaders who would speak in the name of faith while pursuing wealth, influence, and control. According to the text, believers were encouraged to remain focused on the condition of their hearts rather than the prestige of institutions. For Brother Abate, this passage explained why so many generations of monks treated the manuscript with such caution. The teaching challenged one of humanity's oldest tendencies, the desire to place ultimate trust in visible structures rather than personal conviction. The old monk had spent decades reflecting on those words. He had watched the modern world become increasingly connected, increasingly organized, and increasingly dependent on large institutions. Yet he believed the manuscript's message remained unchanged. Stone eventually crumbles. Organizations rise and fall. Empires appear powerful before fading into history. What endures, according to the teaching, is something far less visible. As the candlelight flickered across the ancient pages, Brother Abate reportedly told his disciples that the true temple was never meant to be a building. It was meant to be the inner life of every person seeking truth. For him, this was not merely an interesting theological idea. It was the foundation upon which the remaining teachings would be built. And according to the manuscript, the next teaching was even more controversial because it challenged the very idea that anyone needed an intermediary between themselves and the divine. As the old monk gathered his strength and prepared to continue, the room fell silent. The most guarded section of the manuscript was still waiting to be revealed: the kingdom within. According to the story, Brother Abate paused before revealing the second teaching. The silence inside the monastery chamber grew heavier as the elderly monk carefully turned another fragile page of the manuscript. Of all the teachings contained within the ancient text, this was reportedly the one that generations of monks had treated with the greatest caution. If the first teaching challenged the authority of institutions and religious structures, the second teaching challenged something even more fundamental: the belief that spiritual authority must always come from outside the individual. According to the manuscript, humanity exists between two opposing forces known as the wind of life and the wind of error. These were not described as physical forces, but as spiritual influences, constantly competing for the human heart and mind. The wind of life guided people toward truth, wisdom, compassion, and spiritual awakening. The wind of error, however, worked in a much different way. The manuscript did not portray the wind of error as a dramatic force that suddenly overtook a person. Instead, it entered gradually, often unnoticed. It arrived through greed, pride, deception, selfish ambition, and unhealthy desires. Small compromises accumulated over time until they slowly reshaped a person's character. According to the text, the greatest danger was that many people never realized it was happening. As these influences took hold, the manuscript claimed they hardened the heart and weakened a person's connection to spiritual truth. Eventually, individuals could become completely disconnected from their deeper purpose while continuing to function normally in everyday life. To describe this condition, the manuscript used a striking phrase: the walking tomb. These were people who appeared alive in every outward sense. They worked, raised families, pursued careers, and participated in society. Yet inwardly, something essential had been lost. Their spiritual awareness had faded, leaving them trapped in routines and distractions without recognizing what was missing. But according to the text, Christ did not merely diagnose the problem. He also offered a solution. The remedy, Brother Abate explained, was not found in rituals, ceremonies, religious status, or institutional authority. Instead, it came through direct knowledge of truth. The manuscript taught that every individual possessed the ability to develop a personal awareness of the divine. While teachers and traditions could provide guidance, no intermediary could ultimately replace the inner journey itself. Believers were instructed to observe their thoughts carefully and guard their minds with vigilance. The text compared this responsibility to a watchman standing at the gates of a city, carefully examining everything that sought entry. In the same way, individuals were encouraged to examine their motives, desires, fears, and beliefs. Then came what Brother Abate reportedly considered the most controversial statement in the entire manuscript. According to the text, the kingdom was not merely a distant destination awaiting believers after death. It was also a present reality that could be discovered through inner stillness, self-awareness, and spiritual understanding. The divine presence was not confined to sacred buildings or religious authorities. It existed within the human soul itself. Brother Abate believed this teaching explained why the manuscript had remained hidden for centuries. If people truly embraced the idea that they could encounter spiritual truth directly, many traditional structures of authority would inevitably be questioned. Whether interpreted literally, symbolically, or as spiritual allegory, the teaching carried a powerful challenge. Rather than constantly searching outward for answers, individuals were encouraged to look inward, believing that the deepest truths might already exist closer than they ever imagined. The warning about deception. As the night deepened and the monastery grew quiet, Brother Abate arrived at what he considered the most important and perhaps the most disturbing teaching contained within the ancient manuscript. For decades, he had studied its words, carefully preserving them while reflecting on their meaning. Of all the passages he had encountered, none concerned him more than this one. According to the Canon, Christ warned his disciples that a great deception would arise in the future. Yet unlike the villains commonly imagined in religious prophecy, this deception would not appear as an obvious enemy. It would not announce itself through violence, darkness, or open opposition to faith. Instead, it would arrive wearing a familiar face. The darkness will come, and it will wear my face. To Brother Abate, these words carried profound significance. The manuscript suggested that the greatest danger to believers would not come from those openly hostile to spiritual truth. Rather, it would come from sources that appeared trustworthy, righteous, and even holy. According to the old monk's interpretation, the text described systems that would claim to represent truth while gradually leading people away from it. They would speak the language of faith. They would display sacred symbols. They would present themselves as protectors of spiritual values and defenders of divine authority. On the surface, everything would appear genuine, but beneath that appearance, something very different would be taking place. The manuscript warned that these systems could become instruments of power, control, and manipulation. Instead of helping people grow spiritually, they would encourage dependence. Instead of pointing individuals toward truth, they would direct attention toward authority. The result would be a form of religion that looked authentic while quietly losing its original purpose. Perhaps the most unusual aspect of the teaching was its description of the Antichrist. Unlike many traditional interpretations that focus on a single future ruler, the Canon reportedly portrayed the threat as a system. It was not one person but a recurring pattern, a structure capable of using religion itself as a tool. For centuries, the monks of Debre Demo allegedly believed this warning was not about a specific event waiting somewhere in the future. Instead, they saw it as a cycle that had appeared repeatedly throughout history. Whenever spiritual teachings became closely tied to political power, wealth, influence, or institutional control, the danger described in the manuscript emerged once again. Brother Abate had spent more than 60 years studying these passages. As he observed the modern world, he reportedly believed the warning had become more relevant than ever. Society was flooded with information. Voices competed constantly for attention. People were surrounded by messages claiming to offer truth, yet many struggled to distinguish genuine wisdom from a persuasive illusion. Yet the manuscript's message was not intended to inspire fear. Rather than ending with a prediction of doom, it returned to the teachings that came before. Build the temple of the heart. Seek truth within. Develop discernment. According to the text, these were the safeguards against deception. For Brother Abate, the warning was ultimately a call to personal responsibility. The answer was not blind trust nor constant suspicion. It was the lifelong pursuit of wisdom, humility, and truth. Only then, he believed, could a person recognize the difference between genuine light and darkness disguised as light. The final message. As the candle burned lower and darkness settled over the monastery, Brother Abate knew that his final hours were approaching. The ancient manuscript lay open before him, its fragile pages illuminated by the faint glow of flickering candlelight. For more than 60 years, he had studied its words, guarded its teachings, and reflected on their meaning. Now, surrounded by the disciples who had gathered beside him, he prepared to share his final thoughts. According to the story, the elderly monk wanted his listeners to understand one important truth above all else. The 3 teachings he had revealed were never intended to be mysterious secrets reserved for a privileged few. They were not hidden knowledge meant to elevate one group above another. Instead, they were practical lessons designed to guide ordinary people through extraordinary times. Brother Abate reminded his disciples of the first teaching. Human beings, he said, must be careful not to place their ultimate trust in institutions, buildings, or earthly systems. History was filled with examples of powerful organizations that appeared permanent but eventually faded away. Kingdoms had risen and fallen. Empires had collapsed. Even the grandest structures eventually crumbled. The manuscript taught that genuine faith could not depend entirely on things that were temporary. He then repeated the second teaching. The search for truth, he explained, begins within. While wisdom can be found through teachers, traditions, and sacred writings, every individual must ultimately undertake the journey personally. The manuscript encouraged believers to cultivate discernment, self-awareness, and a direct relationship with spiritual truth, rather than relying solely on the opinions of others. Finally, he returned to the third teaching. The world, he warned, would always contain false appearances and deceptive forms of authority. Not everything that claimed to represent truth would actually serve it. This was why discernment mattered so deeply. People had to learn how to distinguish between appearances and reality, between genuine wisdom and persuasive illusion. According to the account, Brother Abate believed these lessons were especially important for the modern world. He reportedly observed that people were more connected than at any other time in history. Information traveled instantly across continents. Ideas spread around the globe in seconds. Yet despite all this connectivity, many people felt increasingly isolated, confused, and uncertain. At the same time, trust in traditional institutions continued to decline. Governments, media organizations, corporations, and even religious institutions faced growing skepticism. Many individuals found themselves searching for meaning while questioning the very authorities that previous generations had trusted. To Brother Abate, these developments seemed remarkably similar to the conditions described within the manuscript centuries earlier. The teachings he had spent his life preserving appeared more relevant than ever. In a world overflowing with information, the challenge was no longer finding voices to listen to. The challenge was determining which voices deserved to be trusted. As dawn slowly approached, the old monk's strength began to fade. The disciples listened quietly as he repeated the 3 teachings one final time. Build the temple of the heart. Seek truth within. Remain vigilant against deception. These simple principles, he believed, contained wisdom capable of guiding people through even the most uncertain times. Then, according to the story, he fell silent. Whether one views this account as historical fact, religious tradition, or spiritual allegory, its central message remains strikingly consistent. Authentic faith cannot be reduced to institutions alone. The search for truth requires personal commitment, and discernment becomes increasingly valuable in a world filled with competing voices and conflicting claims. As Brother Abate's life came to an end, he believed he was passing on something preserved across generations. Not merely an ancient manuscript, but a timeless challenge. A challenge to look beyond appearances, question easy answers, seek deeper understanding, and remember that the most important spiritual journey is often the one that takes place within the human heart. Outro. Whether these accounts represent history, legend, spiritual symbolism, or a mixture of all 3, they raise fascinating questions about faith, authority, and the search for truth. The story of Brother Abate and the ancient Ethiopian manuscripts challenges us to think beyond what we assume we already know. It reminds us that some of humanity's most enduring mysteries are not found in distant places or hidden chambers, but within our own understanding. For centuries, Ethiopia preserved traditions that remained largely unknown to the Western world. Some may dismiss them, others may embrace them, but few can deny their ability to spark curiosity and debate. Perhaps that is why these stories continue to endure. What do you think about the 3 teachings attributed to the ancient manuscript? Which one stood out to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this exploration of hidden history, forgotten texts, and ancient mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the secrets that history may have left behind.